Hi, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us for USC's Facebook Live. Today, we are going to discuss a little bit about, it's a very interesting observational study that is coming out of our school today. And we're going to talk about USC and the researchers that are behind. Basically, we're looking at veterans who are outside the VA who have maybe dealt with substance use increasing or decreasing, and how that is being dealt with pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and what is going on. My name is Chandrea. I'm with USC Provost Office, and we have with us our USC researchers, Jordan Davis and Eric Peterson, and they're just going to start right away and get into this and tell us a little bit about their observational study and what they found out. Go ahead, guys.
Great.
Eric, yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Great. Hey there. My name is Eric Peterson. I'm an associate professor in Keck School of Medicine, Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences Department.
Jordan?
I'm Jordan Davis. I'm with the USC School of Social Work, and I'm an assistant professor.
And could you guys just, I thought this is interesting because we always talk about veterans that are already within the VA and dealing with any issues they might be having, substance abuse, PTSD. This study is different. Can you talk to us a little bit about it and what you found out?
Yeah, why don't I start, Jordan, then you can jump in. So
Sure.
It's pretty neat the way this came about. So we were doing a research study. It was a one-time survey research study. So it was an online questionnaire of about 1,250 veterans that we had found through the use of social media. Primarily, we recruited them off of Facebook and some veteran-specific social media sites. And we wanted to look at mental health and substance use and also barriers to care for mental health and substance use issues that veterans might be facing. And so we did this survey in February of 2020 and thought that was going to be it. And then, of course, we all know the pandemic hit. And we thought, hey, we have this time point right before the pandemic hit, which has a lot of information about substance use, about mental health, about access to care. What if we got some funding to then follow these veterans through the course of the pandemic? And so we received some funding, and then we gave them another survey in August of 2020, another one in November, and then subsequently gave them 5 additional surveys. And we have one final survey going out in February of 2022, which will then look at these veterans through the course of 2 years of the pandemic. And the things we're looking at are related to mental health and primarily depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, and substance use behaviors. And the primary ones that we're looking at are alcohol use and cannabis use.
Okay, and you're talking, I just want to know a little bit about the sample. So 1,200, are we talking men, women? Who are these veterans?
It's mostly men, so it's mostly white men. So we've got about 90% men. But we did have some ads on our social media sites to try to particularly recruit women and some racial and ethnic minority veterans. And so we have a lot of ideas about how we can try to rope them in better for research efforts, because both women and racial and ethnic minority veterans are groups that need to be looked at a lot more in depth, since most studies are done with white male veterans.
Can you also talk a little bit about outside the VA? Like, explain what that means. And outside the VA, how does that make this study unique? Because we hear a lot about veterans within the VA, but can you explain what does outside the VA mean, and how does that make this study even more interesting?
Well, it's a great question, and frankly, we've kind of couched most of our studies, this one, and we have 4 or 5 other studies going on currently with veterans outside of the VA. And really all that means is they are recruited via methods that Eric and I have developed over the last, 4 years or so, to recruit veterans who are currently not receiving services at the VA. So what that means is the VA has incredible resources, tons of money, tons of research for veterans in the VA. And they do a really good job. How does treatment work? What works best for specific veterans? But we know about half of veterans do not seek services or cannot seek services at the VA. And even more importantly, is the veterans that are not seeking care at the VA, about half of them do need care. They screen positive for PTSD, for alcohol use disorder, for depression, for suicidal thoughts and ideations, right? So our whole goal for our labs in all of these studies is to develop interventions and a better understanding of veterans who cannot or will not seek care at either a VA or even a private healthcare facility, and find ways to deliver these interventions better to these individuals. How do we get interventions to them? How do we understand their behavioral trajectories? Because we know a lot about veterans at the VA, but very little about those that actually don't seek care there.
And what are you learning, not to cut you off, but what are you learning? Why aren't they seeking care? You know, what, either one of you can speak to it, but I was just curious, why aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of barriers. It's something that we have been looking at in our research. I mean, stigma is a big one. Also, just the stigma related to actually going into care, or having people know that you're going and receiving services for mental health. Substance use, there's a lot of stigma about seeking care for substance use. Beliefs that they can handle the problems on their own. And when we think about people from the military and veterans, these are pretty tough people. And so the mindset might be, I can handle this on my own, or I can, this is something that's just going to wear its course and I'll be fine in a little bit. But everybody could really benefit from some help. And so going into the VA or checking in with a provider in the community can really be something that helps move you along and helps you get over some of those barriers.
And are these, these veterans that you've looked at, these 1,200, and I think you had said, how many women do you think you looked at in this survey? Do you have a guesstimate on that?
Yeah, there's probably about 150 women in this survey.
Okay. And when you look at them, are they across all the branches? Like, is there a wide breadth of veterans? I mean, I know you have male and female and different ethnicities, but is there, are they parents? Or are they, like what have you found out?
Yeah. So we're mostly in both on the male and female part. They're both, most of them are from the Army, which the Army is the biggest branch too. So we kind of expect that. But we have found across a couple studies, it's a little more difficult to engage Navy and Air Force veterans in particularly, but we usually do pretty okay with Army and the Marine Corps. I would say the majority of our women veterans in the sample are from the Army. And
I was just curious because, you're reading all these reports. We're in the middle of the pandemic, and there are a lot that came through that said drinking, was skyrocketing. There's a lot of drinking going on, or a lot of consumption. Can you guys shed some light on this group? What did you find out pre-pandemic, post-pandemic? Was there an increase? Was there a decrease? What was going on exactly?
Yeah, so this question, while it might seem simple, can get a little bit tricky. So I'm going to do my best to sort of walk through some of the really sort of basic overarching results that we found. And I'm just going to focus on alcohol use. So we've been seeing lots of reports that alcohol sales are skyrocketing. People are drinking more throughout the pandemic. And there are some early reports that showed that. But if you really kind of dive deep into like what they're actually showing, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, but I believe the big report that came out, there was a big national survey, showed an increase over the pandemic, but it was like 1 drink extra per week. So it's like, okay, like how meaningful is that really? Who knows? But as more and more data started coming out and people started thinking about this more, like, well, maybe there won't be an increase in these things, less socializing, less happy hour, less time at bars, less time with friends and family, right? And our data actually showed, we just published a paper looking at the first year of the pandemic. So we had four or five time points, February to February, right? And what we showed was overall in that sample, we showed a significant decrease in alcohol use and a pretty drastic decrease. In fact, they were going from about, we look at days per month of drinking. It's sort of just an easy way to think about how heavy people are drinking. I believe we were somewhere around like on average, like 10 or 12 drinks per month per person. And it decreased by about 5 or 6 drinks over the course of the pandemic. Now, that was not the case, though, when we started to look at individuals pre-pandemic that had screened in for post-traumatic stress disorder. In fact, we saw the opposite. Those that did screen for PTSD actually showed a slight increase, whereas those that didn't showed that same decrease. So we kind of dove in a little bit, Chandrea, and really started thinking, well, why could this be? And we started looking at sex differences, race, ethnic minority differences, differences by other mental health problems. And frankly, our results they mirrored what others were showing. There were disparities across race, ethnic minority, disparities across male, female veterans, and disparities across those that had pre-pandemic mental health disorders.
And that's so interesting because it kind of goes the opposite of what you would think. One thing, if they were abusing though, if there was substance abuse that was going on, what did you find it was? Was it alcohol? Was it, smoke? Like what did you find that they were abusing?
I mean, so what we actually found was, and what you see in the general veteran population too, is you mostly see, among all the substances, you see higher tobacco use, alcohol use, and cannabis use. We actually were finding that probably only about like 10 out of 100 were using cannabis at a level that, might be considered hazardous. But for some reason, we actually ended up recruiting some pretty heavy drinkers into the sample. So, when Jordan's talking about the numbers going down, they're actually starting at a pretty high level to begin with. And so there's all these kind of measures that we put into the survey. And one of them is a screener for alcohol use disorder. So somebody can take this 10 items and see, oh, I might be somebody that's drinking at a hazardous level. As about half the sample was actually drinking at that level prior to the pandemic. So, they were starting to go down, but they're still kind of drinking, at this higher level. The other issue is when we look at those who started out with alcohol use disorder, or screening for alcohol use disorder, or something called cannabis use disorder, those people actually were experiencing higher levels of PTSD, depression, anxiety throughout the course of the pandemic. So as Jordan was saying, those with more mental health disorders were drinking more heavily and using more cannabis throughout the study. Those who were drinking more heavily and using cannabis are also experiencing kind of higher levels of PTSD, anxiety, and depression.
It's interesting. So it sounds like the variable was the PTSD, and when they had it going into the pandemic, or where they were pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. That's an interesting find. I don't know how much you looked into, you were saying some of the depression and anxiety. Do you think that was something that maybe drinking didn't go up, but did you find that those levels went up while they were in lockdown, while they're in the pandemic, in the midst of it? Or was that also just sort of stayed the same?
No, actually PTSD actually showed kind of a stable kind of negative trend, but depression actually increased during the course of the year of the pandemic. We show it's kind of hard to explain the function of the data. I'm like a nerdy data science guy, but it kind of plateaus and kind of goes up a little bit over the course of the study. Something that we also dove into were what we call COVID specific mechanisms or predictors. So we actually over the course of the study, we measured things like negative reactions to the pandemic, job loss, furlough, et cetera, and loneliness, right? This is one thing that us as researchers, there's lots of people out there that study loneliness as that's their thing. Eric and I have never studied loneliness a day in our life, but this became a thing, right? You heard it in the news, you saw it in the media, right? So we actually took those measures and we decided, well, let's see how that actually affected these decreases in alcohol use over the course of the study. And what we showed was loneliness was a strong and consistent predictor of increases in alcohol use over the course of the pandemic. And the negative reactions were as well. And actually, as the pandemic sort of lasted longer, we saw that those that were starting to lose their job or have less hours at work or got furloughed, it didn't have a really strong effect early on, I think, because people thought, oh, well, maybe this will be over quick. Right. But as that pandemic moved on, that losing your job or being furloughed or whatever had a strong effect on the alcohol use over the course at the end of the pandemic, or that first year of the pandemic.
I was gonna there's a question, looks like it came in from the audience. It said, when speaking with fellow veterans, found the pandemic was welcomed by most of them because it justified their social isolation, interaction with others. Was that something your study came across? So
this is
interesting. Good question.
It's interesting. So that's something. So when you get data like this, and it kind of goes against what you're really thinking. I mean, I think a lot of people thought everyone's doing awful. So let's take PTSD for an example. I mean, it stabilized or it went down a little bit. So we're thinking, how do we justify this? And one of the things that we thought about was, so PTSD, some of the hallmark symptoms of PTSD are related to avoidance. And so if you're somebody who has symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and they get triggered more when you go out because you have to go to the grocery store, because you have to go out to a crowded place. I mean, that was actually not a possibility. I mean, you literally couldn't go anywhere where there was crowds. You had to stay home. So those avoidance symptoms couldn't really get activated for the first 6 months, and then we went through another lockdown period. So there's quite a bit of time there.
What did you say again, Eric? You had said, what's the last time you checked in with them? It was you or Jordan? Someone gave me a last check-in time.
Just in August of this, so just a few months ago, and then our last check-in will be in November.
And how are they doing now? Like, is there any update that most recent check-in? Like, did you find out, across the board, are people doing better with everything across the board, or is it sort of stayed the same with what you found out? Like, has anyone improved at the end?
I mean, Jordan, you can speak to this better than me, but it's pretty much stabilized. I mean, we saw some jumps in those first 6 months, from February to August 2020, but things have been pretty much stabilized. Maybe you want to talk about the stress analyses, Jordan, but I mean, we are seeing that there is this group that is increasing their stress a little bit more over time. It seemed to be getting worse.
Yeah, it's a small group of veterans, but I won't go into all the details, but of course you can imagine stress is a big part of this pandemic. In fact, we would probably consider the pandemic a global stressful experience. And we did a pretty cool analysis recently, looking at how different groups of people change in their what we call perceived stress. So like how stressful our everyday life, like how are you coping with stress? And we see people that kind of stay high all the way through the whole pandemic. That's not that uncommon, of course, stay really low, but I guess the more risky profile will be those that started pretty low in February, and then they've just rapidly increased in their stress, and it's not coming down at all thus far. And we did some analyses showing that those that were increasing during that the 18 months, because we just had this August time point, had higher PTSD, higher depression, higher anxiety scores at 18 months after our first initial assessment. So there are a small group of veterans that seem to be sort of on a path to kind of not stabilizing or getting better. It's sort of continuing.
And and obviously that's what brings us full circle of you wanting to reach these veterans who are outside the VA, who aren't connected. Can you just delve into that a little bit more? Because the whole reason that you guys do these observational surveys and studies is to, the betterment of the public, to help mankind. And can you just talk a little bit about why you think it's important to reach this group that's almost unreachable, right? Because I don't know, you don't have to give away your secrets. I don't know how you track them down if they're not connected to the VA, but somehow you found them. Why is it even maybe more so important that you help this group?
I mean, the secret is, so we're probably missing a lot of veterans. But we use social media, and veterans are a lot of people are on social media. There's veteran specific social media sites. There's Facebook, obviously. We're able to find them through these sites. We advertise a study and we say, hey, we're interested in finding veterans. We also ask them to ask their family and friends. So even people that aren't veterans that might know a veteran can then share this ad with them and be a part of the study. And one of the really nice things we find is that veterans, for the most part, they want to help each other out. So when we actually talk to the veterans and say, why did you want to be a part of this study? A lot of times they'll say, because this is going to help, other veterans. And so, that's a really cool thing. It's a really good community to bring people together. But it's a really important group, as Jordan was mentioning before, because there's just a lot of resources dedicated to veterans that are already in the VA. So even if you want to do a study on mental health, you walk into a VA, maybe go to the primary care clinic, put up some flyers, you can grab people. They're sitting right there. They might see the flyers. It's a little daunting to think about kind of this missing group, and it's about 50% of veterans. And we really target more recent combat veterans. So veterans that have, seen combat in maybe the last 15, 20 years or so. And so these veterans are a lot harder to find. And so we figured out, let's try to find them. And then once we find them, sure, we can do a bunch of studies with them and give them a bunch of surveys and say, hey, they're not doing so great. But the point of this research is to inform these programs that we've developed or partner with other people that have already developed these programs so that these veterans can then take a program on their phone or the computer, or we can help encourage them to actually go seek in-person care so that they can get some of those mental health and substance use needs addressed.
And, underrepresented groups, Jordan, right? This is sort of an area you are familiar with. Can you talk about it? Because I think, well, and both of you, but I think it's interesting that you are trying to find this group that, isn't found, isn't located, isn't connected in the way that we would like them to be to help them. Can you talk to me about
Yeah.
that, Jordan?
Sure. Most of my research prior to the last 3 or 4 years has not been with veterans. In fact, through my graduate career and early career here at USC, I've primarily worked with what I would call underserved or marginalized youth, specifically adolescents and young adults, those in the criminal justice system, those who are foster care, in some sort of service industry, or homeless youth drop-in centers. I met Eric years ago. We kind of, Eric and I are best friends, but we also get to work together. So it's kind of a win-win. And Eric has this population of veterans that he's been working with. And I had been studying a very specific intervention type. And Eric and I were like, hey, let's combine forces and see what we can do. And I don't see it any different than the other work that I was doing. In fact, I see this as just an extension of the work that I was doing. My entire career goal, my life goal, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, the goal of my students in our lab, what I tell every student that comes and works with me is, we're going to do good work. We're going to do a lot of clinical trial work. We're going to help a lot of people. But the main goal here is to really focus on those underserved populations, people who can't or won't, or for some reason can't receive the care that others can receive. So we have a couple studies right now, Chandrea, that are clinical trials, and that actually are nearly like they are direct results of this observational study. We're seeing things and we're able to write grants to say, hey, look at this group over here that's struggling with multimorbid PTSD and alcohol use disorder, right? And we have a grant to study that. We have a grant now to study daily escalations in PTSD in an attempt to address what we call just-in-time interventions, meaning those veterans who are really struggling, who can't, wait the once a month or once every 2 week intervals with their therapist. We can get it in the intervention just in time. So Eric said, like, observational studies are great. They're, easy to explain, but really our goal is to take these data and apply it to really start developing interventions that can be easily delivered, cheaply delivered, and widely distributed.
And what does that look like, just for people that like myself? Because I always look at this and this is such an amazing, interesting study. And it's one that I haven't really seen happening with our veterans. And so, the big question is, what do you do with it? Like, what do you do with this amazing bit of information? So what does that look like? Are these outreach programs? Is it on social media? Is it a campaign? Can you just kind of tell us, what do you do with it once you've got this amazing intel?
Yeah, I mean, there's several, and we can pick one. Maybe you can talk about MBRP, Jordan. But so we have one right now that we're developing, and we've done a couple of these now, we call it an intervention, but it's more like an outreach program. So what we're doing is finding veterans, and they're mostly, like I said, recently discharged. And the reason we focus on them is because most of my work prior to working with veterans was with college students. And so college students are a group that, drink quite heavily during a pretty brief period of their lives. And then most of them do transition out. And for the most part, they do okay. There's some college students that we still need to focus on and provide efforts for as they transition to adulthood. But there's a lot of brief interventions and online interventions and mobile-based interventions that have been done with college students, which are kind of around the age of what we're looking for with these young veterans, that seem to work okay. And you can reach people, you can provide them with a 30-minute intervention that can reach them and reach people that aren't interested in coming in for care. So we thought, hey, can we apply some of this work to veterans? And the thing that we're doing right now with veterans is actually an outreach program to help encourage them to go in and seek more formal care. So there's two pieces. One, we're hoping that just taking the program alone can help them reduce their drinking. But for some, they probably need something more than just a 30-minute intervention, an interactive program that they take on their computer. So can we encourage them to go and seek more formal care? now before their problems become more chronic, before they get in all sorts of trouble from drinking or not, having these unaddressed mental health problems.
That's all. I mean, this is all so good to hear. It gives a lot of hope, I'm sure, and especially with Veterans Day approaching. We've got 5 minutes left. I wanted to sort of, one thing I think is great, it's the best that USC can be when we combine schools, we combined different researchers, they get together. It's interesting. Neither of you guys are veterans. Both of you are doing this really outside the box, so interesting, reaching groups that would otherwise, like Jordan was saying, I mean, there could just get worse and just no one would reach them. Can you just talk about the working together and how you guys came together? I mean, you seem to be good friends. It seems to be effortless. You guys are across different schools. How did that even happen?
Go ahead, Eric.
Okay, so I'm maybe just like a year or two ahead of Jordan. So I was, so he was in graduate school and had reached out at a conference that we always attend and asked if I wanted to be a part of this panel talk that he was giving. And I thought this was great. And we hung out a few times and really hit it off and had, similar research interests. But, like he's mentioning, just noticed like, this is somebody that I really think I could work really closely with. It's easy. I don't need to like watch what I say, I mean, he's also just brilliant, so there's things that I can't do that he can do very easily. And I don't know, I think vice versa too. So we kind of, have can work to each other's strengths. And so it's just a great partnership. And it's something I think that, we've had for about 4 years now. I can't think of any project that I'm on. There's maybe one project I'm on right now that he's not on. So, I mean, it's just something that I think are going to keep going. We've had success with it.
Yeah, we were just out to dinner with a mutual friend. Actually was one of Eric's early mentors, Joe Labrie, over here over on the west side. He was a very famous alcohol use researcher. We were sitting down at dinner, and Joe, we were just sitting there chatting, and we're talking about some projects, and Joe goes, "So what, are you guys just like a team now or something? Like, is it just one with one comes the other?" We're like, "Yeah, pretty much." So yeah, we have a lot of really great ideas. Like I couldn't have said it better. Our strengths are different and they are very complementary. In fact, I'm really excited about some of the grants we have under review right now, one in which is following a large sample of women and racial ethnic minority veterans. Again, just observational. We know nothing about these groups of veterans. And it was shocking to me when we dove in to that literature. We know nothing or very little. So I'm excited about all the stuff we have going on here at USC. I think Eric and I are probably going to continue to keep driving forward, trying to get some of these interventions to and some help to these veterans who probably desperately need it.
It's wonderful. Well, obviously we're going to keep up. And I know that USC with all the social media will be putting more out about your guys' study and what's been going on with it and updates, and we'll make it so that it's accessible so that other people that may want to, even veterans, anybody who really wants to sort of reach out or find out a little bit more and maybe even possibly connect with the VA or get some help. So is there anything else that you guys wanted to say before we wrap this up? Anything that, any parting words?
I just, thanks for doing this. So as we mentioned, we really, thanks to USC for doing this. Thanks to Facebook for having us. But, for any of the veterans that are out there listening or family members of veterans, there is really good help out there for individuals. You don't need to be severe. You don't need to feel that you're taking resources away from anybody else. I mean, I'm a clinical psychologist. I think everybody should go and talk to somebody, and especially if you're somebody that's had, some adversity in your life, go and try and get it addressed.
Okay. Wonderful. Well said. Well, again, these are our brilliant, great USC researchers. So thank you, Jordan and Eric. We really appreciate you spending this time sharing, doing this study, and we look forward to so much more in the future. So that's it. Thanks, you guys. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay.